discussion to put so much reliance on it. And I think a lot of this comes from the tendency to apply concepts that have been developed and make sense in maritime warfare to the land battle. And the assumption that you can call on systems that are some way away from the battlefield, or what is now known as the battle space, to give it an extra dimension. There is a tendency to believe that you can call on systems to provide your firepower, though they be some distance away from the actual point of contact. In that way, your forward troops become sensors, become a way of gathering information, but not a way of fighting. I think this is a doctrine that many army commanders would find rather dangerous. They would rather have their own organic firepower when it comes to the crunch, because they won't have the confidence that somebody in headquarters will appreciate the priority they're facing at the time. More seriously, I think, is the conundrum that we are left with after the war against Iraq in 1991. It's important to note that prior to this war, although a lot of this technology was available and known about, there was no certainty that it would work, perhaps particularly in the desert. People talk about what the sound might do to tanks, and also the evidence of American military enterprises up to 1990-91 was not particularly encouraging. There was an assumption that at the first hint of casualties, the Americans would pull out. In the event, Saddam Hussein fought the war against the coalition in a way that the coalition would have wished. It is very rare in warfare for your opponent to be so helpful, to fight as if it is a setup in a staff college exercise designed to show things off to the best in order that all the visitors can be properly impressed. Not only has the United States and its allies learned from the war against Iraq, so have other countries that might wish to take on the West, and Western-related countries. They are unlikely to fight in the same way again. This creates, I think, many of the particular problems that we face in trying to anticipate the course of future conflicts, because an awful lot of the analysis and work that goes into the discussion of this revolution in military affairs supposes that the United States will be fighting something very similar to the United States. There is discussion of a peer competitor, is the term used. It's very hard to work out who this actually is, because the closer you look, it looks as if it is the United States. And sort of concepts are being developed in the war against oneself, simulated, of course, only. But it's they're limited. What then, and Charles referred to the dangers of an asymmetric war, that is a war in which the opponent will be seeking to turn its terms into something different. Well, we can see what this might be. First, to drag the conflict more into cities. Wars fought in deserts are flattering to some extent to regular forces. Things are less easy when you're pulled into a city, and I wonder if our images left over from 1991 would be quite different if the Iraqis had not evacuated Kuwait City when they did, if Kuwait had to be fought over to a more vigorous extent. Secondly, there will be the greater emphasis, one way or the other, on weapons directed against civil society. One normally says weapons of mass destruction, and of course the most frightening are exactly that. The fact that we have reached with Iraq this particular difficult question of biological weapons indicates one reason why we should be worried about those sorts of systems. But it is not only the traditional weapons of mass destruction that we should be worried about. At different times in Bosnia, there have been concerns, on the one hand, not realised, about such things as emptying chemical factories into the Danube, poisoning by means other than weapons designed for the purpose. At the other level, there is just simple fear and terror, for which you don't need complicated weapons, you just need access and people ruthless enough to carry that sort of warfare out. What this means is the natural response to a high-tech, sophisticated war may well be to draw things back to as crude and primitive level as possible. And this raises one of the most difficult questions of all, because a lot of the discussion this morning, both politically and military, is predicated on the assumption that the United States is the dominant superpower prevalent wherever. Is this question of whether these are conditions in which the United States will wish to carry on being engaged militarily, or indeed not just the United States, other Western countries as well. The problem that is faced is whether these sorts of attacks that might be directed against the civil societies of the West, never mind those caught up in the conflict, are of such a nature that they worry the governments that are not directly involved in those parts of the world, who do sense their interests may not be wholly bound up, and worry whether the costs might outweigh the gains. Now, this is not the position we are at the moment. As we saw earlier this year, Britain and the United States at least are prepared to stay engaged. But whether this will carry on is something that I think we have to keep always in the back of our mind. Let me turn now quickly to the question of war versus information systems, because one of the ideas of an alternative to attacks using weapons of mass destruction, an identification of an area where Western societies may seem particularly vulnerable, reflects the fact that in so many aspects of our societies we rely on information technologies, whether it's in our banking systems, air traffic control, or never mind the normal workings of our military organisations. We know that information systems are vulnerable to mischievous attacks, hackers, viruses, of which there are thousands now in existence. And anybody who uses in their everyday life a personal computer is more than aware these days of how dependent they can become on these things and how exasperating life can be when suddenly they crash. Therefore, because these vulnerabilities exist, it has come to be presumed that there is a target set here. There is something that an enemy might pick on. There is no doubt that this is an area of great interest to extortionists, to disgruntled employees, to people who like hacking into the Pentagon just for the fun of it. Whether it is as yet the basis for a military strategy, I'm not so sure. It's a secondary thing if it is, the sort of thing that we might do, as was done in previous wars. But I think one has to be careful that an awful lot of what is discussed are gimmicks and possibilities that you would be well advised not to rely upon. For example, trying to interfere and manipulate the messages going through somebody else's information systems. But it's something that we have to be aware of, and I think is going to attract increasing attention in Western countries, not particularly only because of what hostile countries might do, but what terrorist groups might do, or just simply, and I think probably most importantly, criminal organisations. Finally, let me look at the question of the consequences of an information-rich environment. One of the reasons why perhaps I'm less bothered than others about the vulnerability of information systems to attack is because there are so many of these systems around. Information is not like other commodities. It is not like fuel, ammunition, food, that you want to get to the front line if you're going to be able to sustain your fighting forces. Because if that supply chain is interrupted or stopped, then you really can starve the frontline forces. Logistics, we know that sense is crucial. Information is different. It is a very renewable resource. There is masses of it around. It is very important. You can take a lot of it with you. You can update it by all sorts of systems, many of which no longer have to be of a dedicated military sort. There is now an existing satellite of reconnaissance, a reconnaissance satellite of military capable quality that is operated by an American civil firm. You can get very good images from it. Everybody now has access to the global positioning system, which was still a bit of a novelty in 1991. Exercises have been fought in the United States against opponents relying wholly on mobile phones and other civil communications. The internet is well known as now as a means of gathering information quickly and communicating very quickly, and it has already been used in some insurgencies. This is all before we talk about the broadcasting media, the so-called CNN, or as we should say here, the BBC effect, whereby information is transmitted far more quickly in the public domain than often it can move through the rather more cumbersome military procedures. Operating in this environment puts enormous demands on military organisations. They have to assume that what they're doing is much more transparent than what was done in the past. We have had to learn as part of the training of our officers that they can assume that the media is watching them all the time. Indeed, I was struck not with the last spat in the Gulf with Iraq, but one of it was 93, being rung up by one of the British broadcasting media, asked to comment on the military operation that was going to take place that afternoon by the United States. And I said, how do you know? Have they announced it? No, they said, but they've ordered a news blackout. And that was the key, that something was going to happen. I think this has very important consequences because with technology that is available to everybody, then you can't just work on the basis of easily denial. It is the enemy of closed societies as well as closed organisations. And this, again, I think is something that has to be taken into account. And you can see how the countries that have tried to keep out information find it extremely difficult now to do so. So what are my conclusions here? First, the information age is different. It does make a difference to the way that conflicts are conducted, but often in surprising and eccentric ways. I just shouldn't assume that it pushes us towards a particular type of conflict. Secondly, it exists side by side with an earlier revolution in military affairs, which is the nuclear one, with capacities for enormous harm and destructiveness. These still exist, and the relationship between the two has yet to be decided. Third, information is not the same as knowledge. And knowledge is certainly not the same as wisdom. That it makes a lot of difference how one understands and uses the information that comes in. And that can be interfered with in a variety of ways. But the major issue is whether we have the grasp of societies, of our society and our opponents to understand it. And that is why I think it is so important when thinking about the future, especially now the sort of warfare which does not require the British to have bases east of Suez in the way that we did to be involved, because we can operate at much longer distances. One of the consequences of that is it's much harder to have the close understanding that was developed when groups of soldiers and seamen had to be based in other societies over long periods. In the end, local knowledge remains critical, and this requires new forms of cooperation if that local knowledge is going to continue to work. Next, I think we have to at least raise the difficulties of keeping the United States and others engaged in the problems of regions other than their own, when they may perceive some of the costs of involvement to outweigh the gains. Lastly, we have to be aware that the logic of much of contemporary technology, the ease with which it is assumed now that the West can probably win in a straightforward battle of regular forces against regular forces, that is going to put more pressure onto civil societies. And in the end, this is as old a rule of warfare as you can find, it is the stability of those civil societies, the legitimacy of the governments, that is going to make a tremendous difference to their ability to cope with the conflicts of the future.